Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare. Guru Bhakti ki jai. Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Hare Krishna. So we keep reading from Canto 7, Chapter 6, the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, entitled Prahlad Instructs His Demonic Schoolmates. And today we're reading text 9. It's a very beautiful section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, these chapters 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we'll read the text. Ko gruheshu pumans saktam atmanam ajitendriya snehapashair dridhair baddham utsaheta vimochitum. Ko gruheshu puman saktam atmanam ajitendriya snehapashair dridhair baddham utsaheta vimochitum. Ko gruheshu puman sakta atmanam ajitendriya snehapashair dridhair baddham utsaheta vimochitum. The devotees can chant.
Ko griheshu puman saktam atmanam ajitendriyaha sneha pasha dirhar bhadham utsaheta vimochitum.
Anyone else? Okay. I'll read the word for word translation. Kaha, what? Griheshu, to householder life. Puman, man. Saktam, very much attached. Atmanam, his own self, the soul. Ajita Indriya, who has not conquered the senses. So Indriya means senses, we know, and Jita means to win. Ajita is the opposite of winning, which is losing. So one who has not conquered his senses. Sneha Pashe, the ropes of affection. So Sneha means affection or love. Pasha just means binding. And in this context, Srila Prabhupada translates it as rope. So Pasha literally means anything that binds you. It literally doesn't mean rope, but it means anything that binds you. Dridhai, very strong. Baddham, bound hand and foot. Utsaheta is able, and vimochitam, to liberate from material bondage. And translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. What person too attached to household life due to being unable to control his senses, can liberate himself. An attached householder is bound very strongly by ropes of affection for his family, wife, children, and other relatives. And purport by Srila Prabhupada. Prahlad Maharaj's first proposal was Kaumara Acharet Pragyo Dharman Bhagavatam here. This is the first verse of this chapter. One who is sufficiently intelligent should use the human form of life, human form of body, from the very beginning of life. In other words, from the tender age of childhood to practice the activities of devotional service, giving up all other engagements. Dharman Bhagavatam means the religious principles of reviving a relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For this purpose, Krishna personally advises Sarvadharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Braja. This is in the 18th chapter, text 66. Give up all other duties and surrender unto me. While in the material world, we manufacture so many duties in the name of so many isms, but our actual duty is to free ourselves from the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. For this purpose, one must be liberated from material bondage, and especially from household life. Household life is actually a kind of license for a materially attached person by which to enjoy sense gratification under regulative principles. Otherwise, there is no need of entering household life. Before entering household life, one should be trained as a brahmachari, living under the care of a guru, whose place is known as Gurukula. Brahmachari Gurukule Vasan, Danto Guru Hitam, the 7th canto, 12th chapter, text 1. From a very beginning, a brahmachari is trained to sacrifice everything for the benefit of the guru. A brahmachari is advised to go begging alms door to door, addressing all women as mother, and whatever he collects, he goes to the benefit of the guru. In this way, he learns to control his senses and sacrifice everything for the guru. When he's fully trained, if he likes, he's allowed to marry. Thus, he is not an ordinary grihastha who's learned only how to satisfy his senses. The trained grihastha can gradually give up household life and go to the forest to become increasingly enlightened in spiritual life, and at last take sannyas. Prahlad Maharaj explained to his father that to be free from all material anxieties, one should go to the forest. Hitvatma patam grihmandakupam. This is the previous chapter. One should give up his household, which is a place for going further and further down into the darkest regions of material existence. The first advice, therefore, is that one must give up household life. Grihmandakupam. However, one prefers to remain in the dark well of household life because of uncontrolled senses. He becomes increasingly entangled by the ropes of affection for his wife, children, servants, house, money, and so on. Such a person cannot attain liberation from material bondage. Therefore, children should be taught from the very beginning of life to be first-class brahmacharis. Then it will be possible for them to give up household life in the future. To return home back to Godhead, one must be completely free from material attachment. Therefore, Bhakti Yoga means Vairagya Vidya, the art that one can help develop a distaste for material enjoyment. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 127, Sutta Goswami says, Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janatyashu Vairagya Jnanam Yat Chayat Ahetukam. By rendering devotional service under the Supreme Personality of God, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. If one engages in devotional service from the beginning of life, he easily attains Vairagya Vidya or Asakti, detachment, and becomes Jitendriya, the controller of his senses. One who perfectly engages in devotional service is therefore called a Goswami or Swami, master of the senses. Unless one is a master of the senses, he should not accept the renounced order of life sannyasa. A strong inclination for sense enjoyment is the cause of the material body. Without full knowledge, one cannot be unattached to material enjoyment. But as long as one is not in that position, one is not fit to return home back to Godhead. I'll read the translation once again for context. What person too attached to household life due to being unable to control his senses can liberate himself? An attached householder is bound very strongly by the ropes of affection for his family, wife, children, other relatives. Very powerful statement by Prahlad Maharaj in this chapter. And in the previous verses as well, Prahlad Maharaj very wonderfully delineates how an attached person's life is wasted. And we read that in the last few days, but it's just worth repeating because it's such a succinct analysis of a person who's not spiritually oriented, how they simply waste their life. Not because we want to criticize people who are not spiritually oriented, but it's just to remind us because when we actually think about it deeply, we're not that far from that position. We may feel proud that we are devotees and so on, but the reality is just by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada and the Acharya, Guru Parampara, and our spiritual master, we have become connected to Krishna. But for that one connection, we were very much in the other situation. Right? So that's why Prahlad Maharaj speaks about this, and also Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, so that we can understand that we are not too far from that situation. We were in that situation ourselves, and by the mercy of the spiritual master and Srila Prabhupada's deep affection for the suffering humanity, that he came at the ripe old age of 70, he came to the United States to help us get connected with Krishna. So we should never forget that we're not that far from that situation. So it's not, Prahlad Maharaj is not talking about somebody else that we should read about and say, oh, that those karmis. This, when we actually analyze our own life, we're not that really far from that situation. So he speaks about how he analyzes the life of a attached sense gratifier who's not really interested in anything spiritual. That maximum lifespan is 100 years, and very rarely do we find people who live up to 100. So it's not that every single person is guaranteed 100 years. Even if you examine people that we know, most people that we know don't live to 100. So that's the maximum lifespan. Of course, you may argue that there are some people who live to 110, 120. There might be some records and so on, but that's not the norm. Generally, people are not living 100 plus years. So if you take that to be the maximum, then a lot of people sleep a lot. So Prahlad Maharaj says half the life is wasted sleeping. And then the first 20 years, the first 10 years, generally, you don't even know what's going on. You're just going with the flow. And then the next 10 years, your senses become more developed. And then in your youth, you're just focused on all those things. So the first 20 years are wasted that way. The last 20 years are inevitably the body breaks down, and then people are more focused on those kind of things. So that leaves only 30 years in the middle, 30, 40 years in the middle. It's a, what do you do then? Because if you take the sleeping and the working, then you hardly have any time left. So when you break down the life in that way, you really don't have any time left. So Prahlad Maharaj is actually showing us the stark reality that if someone thinks, oh, there's a long time left and I can practice Krishna consciousness at a later time because I will have time, that's not the reality. We just don't realize it. And in this particular verse, Prahlad Maharaj is talking about persons too attached to household life. And so when you read the purport and you read the verse in isolation, one may think that, well, in that case, we just have to give up all affection to our family members and just ignore them and go away from family life. But that is not the full context of the verse, right? So if you look at Srila Prabhupada's purports in other parts of the Srimad Bhagavatam and what the acharyas have said, this has to be taken in the context of the overall message, that the whole point really is to become attached to Krishna. And if attachment to family life becomes an impediment to your Krishna consciousness, then that should be given up. And that's what Srila Prabhupada always said. So in the case of this particular verse, what is specifically mentioned is attached householder. Now, how do we understand attached householder? So the concept of Grihamedhi is mentioned by Srila Prabhupada and also mentioned in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that the Grihamedhi, a person too attached to household life, has many different topics of hearing. Shrotavyadini Rajendra Runam Santi Shastrasa Apashata Mata Tattvam Griheshu Grihamedinam. Srila Prabhupada would quote this verse very, very often. So Shrotavyadini Rajendra. So this is Sukadeva Goswami telling King Parishad, O king, Rajendra, O king, Shrotavyadini Rajendra. There are many, many topics of hearing. Shrotavyadini means there are many, many topics of hearing. Runam Santi Sahasrasa. Among people, there are many, many topics. Sahasrasa means thousands and thousands of topics. So for attached person who is not interested in Krishna consciousness, there are so many other topics to hear. If you were to turn on as you're driving any other radio station, you'd hear people talking about all sorts of subjects, sports and politics and everything else. But very rarely would you hear anybody speak about the goal of human life and we should become devoted to God. Very rarely do people hear and talk about those topics. So Sukadeva Goswami is telling Parishad Maharaj that an attached person can find millions of topics. And when we, even in our preaching activities, approach regular folk and tell them about chanting Hare Krishna, the first thing that they'll tell you is they don't have time. If you give them a book and ask them to read, they don't have time. Well, everybody has 24 hours. It's not like we have more time than them. It's a matter of how they prioritize their life. So they prioritize their life in such a way that they're not able to, first of all, understand the importance of spiritual life. And secondly, they don't have the inclination and they haven't developed the taste. So for them, the answer is that there is no time. So this attached householder has all these topics for hearing, how to make money and so on. That's what they're focused on. So apashyatam atvatatvam. Apashyatam means one. Pashya means to see in Sanskrit. Pashya means to see. Krishna uses those words again in the Gita as well. Pashya me yogam aishwaryam. Pashya means to see. So pashyatam atvatatvam. Atmatatvam. And this word atmatatvam is used in another context in this verse as well. Tattva means the truth. Tattva. Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yad jnanam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdate. So in that verse also tattva comes. Tattva means tattvadarshi. Tattvadarshi means one who sees the truth. So atma tattva. So atma means the self, and in the context of the words atma can mean the body, can mean the mind, can mean intelligence, can mean the soul as well. So in this context, it means the soul. Atma Tattva means the reality of the soul. So one who cannot understand or see the importance of the reality of the soul is considered a Grihamedhi, Griheshu Grihamedina, one who lives at home as a Grihamedhi. So the importance is given to being a Grahastha, not a Grihamedhi. And the reason why I'm saying this is because vast majority of people practicing Krishna consciousness, by definition, will be Grahasthas. Srila Prabhupada said that as well. That at the beginning, as the movement was just getting started, the necessity was for people to be living in the temples as full-time, dedicated brahmacharis and sadhus. Srila Prabhupada said in many of his writings that as the movement grows, the vast majority of people who will practice Krishna consciousness, members of our society, will be people living outside and grahasthas. This was recognized by Srila Prabhupada. So it was not like Srila Prabhupada's intention was every single member of ISKCON will be a person living full-time in the temple. That was not the idea of how to expand the Krishna consciousness movement. That's not what Srila Prabhupada even said. So it's just a practical reality that, and we see that unfolding, that majority of the people who are sincerely practicing Krishna consciousness, chanting their rounds sincerely, spending a lot of their effort and time and money in spreading Krishna consciousness, are grahasthas. They have family and children and so on. So how do we understand what's written in this verse with the difference with how we can practice Krishna consciousness is what I wanted to touch on for a few minutes. And this is all based on Srila Prabhupada's purports across the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, and what I've heard from my own spiritual master on this topic. Srila Prabhupada always wanted to establish Daivi Varnashram. And Varnashram does have, and Srila Prabhupada talks about this quite a bit, that it does have the four Varnas and the four Ashramas. And why is it called Varnashrama? The word Ashrama just doesn't mean some kind of physical location. It doesn't mean some kind of building. And it also means that, like someone said, this is an ashram. It may mean it's a place where it provides shelter. But the key word or the key essence of the word ashrama is shelter. So this, whether it's a brahmachari ashram or a grahastha ashram or a vanaprastha ashram or a sannyasa ashram, the key point is that it has to provide shelter. And shelter to our Krishna consciousness, shelter to our bhakti, has to nurture our bhakti and deepen our connection with Krishna. That's when it becomes an ashrama. Otherwise, it just becomes a vana. Vana means forest. The difference between ashrama and vana is that, and forest or a shelter is that in an ashrama, you're sheltered. You're not attacked by wild animals. You're not attacked by the elements of nature, whether it's extreme cold or extreme heat. You feel sheltered. You feel nurtured. Whereas in the vana or a forest, you're subjected to the elements of nature, extreme cold, extreme heat, snow, all of that. You're subjected to wild animals who might attack your body and so on. So you don't feel safety, you don't feel shelter in the vana or forest. You feel shelter in an ashrama. So in that same context, right? If you are really experiencing shelter for your bhakti, because ultimately shelter for the body is there. That's since we have the physical body, we have to have shelter for the body. That's just a need of the body. But the real shelter we have to experience is shelter for our Krishna consciousness. So when we mold our Krishna conscious life in such a way, a grahastha life in such a way, that Krishna becomes the center of gravity, center of the house, center of our consciousness, and everything that we do is centered around Krishna, then automatically you start becoming a grahastha instead of a gramidi. Srila Prabhupada specifically writes in the purports of Bhagavad Gita, I forget which specific words, but he says, children are natural objects of affection. So if a person feels affection for their children, doesn't mean that they're demonic. That's not what Srila Prabhupada is saying at all. And that's not what it means. So we have to nurture the next generation because they're the next generation of devotees. If we don't show them love and affection and nurture them in the right way, then how are we serving Krishna? Because we have to understand that they're not our property. They're independent living souls. They're souls that are connected with Krishna in their own independent way. Each living entity is independent. So if we take on the responsibility of being a parent, it is our responsibility to ensure that they are nurtured both physically and spiritually and mentally, and they have the best opportunity to become Krishna conscious. We can't force them to become Krishna conscious because even Krishna didn't force Arjun. He told Krishna, Arjun was told in the end of the Gita that, have you heard what I told you? Great. Now you do what you think is right. So if Krishna doesn't force Arjun, and he's given independence to each living entity, we really have no opportunity to force anybody. But we create an environment where Krishna consciousness becomes attractive, it becomes uh, relevant, and it becomes exciting. And then the next generation becomes attracted to Krishna consciousness. Because if you feel that it's only our responsibility to become Krishna conscious ourselves and not really worry about our next generation, then pretty soon there will be nobody to carry on. So it is a responsibility of a grahastha to have Krishna conscious children. Srila Prabhupada says this over and over again in his purports. And raise them to a point where they become Krishna conscious. So that will also help us in our Krishna consciousness and also help them in their Krishna consciousness. So the point that I was trying to make is, maybe in a roundabout way, is that it's not that we become completely heartless individuals based on the purport of the verse. It's quite the contrary, actually. We become really, really understanding that Krishna consciousness is the center of gravity, and all our activities are centered around that fact as a grahastha as well. And as Mahaprabhu said, and Narottam Das Thakur sings this, that Gre Thako, Vane Thako, Sa Hari Bole Thako. So the crux is to become Krishna conscious. So if a person is inherently a grahastha, and that's then forcing them to become a, a renunciant is really not going to work for their Krishna consciousness. And the other side as well, a person who's by nature a solitary brahmachari or sadhu. Forcing them to be a grihastha doesn't work either. So the varnas and the ashramas are set up in that way that we can dovetail whatever propensity we have to become fully Krishna conscious. If you look at even the Srimad Bhagavatam, the time when Lord Krishna appeared on this earth 5,000 years ago, all the great associates of Lord Krishna were many of them were not Brahmanas. The Nanda Maharaj and they were Vaishyas and they were Grihasthas, focused on cow protection and farming and so on. Yudhishthira Maharaj was a Kshatriya king, and they all focused on their varnashrama duties, but very, very 100% firmly centered on Krishna. Krishna was the center of every single thing that they did. And so the concept that Srila Prabhupada is talking about is the concept of, first of all, understanding Krishna as a center. And we may be grihasthas, we may be brahmacharis, we may be vanaprasthis, we may be sannyasis. That is our specific position in the varnashrama system. We may be brahmanas, we may be kshatriyas, vaishyas, shudras. That is our very specific position in the varna system. So regardless of our position in the varna system or the ashrama system, we all have the equal opportunity to become fully Krishna conscious. And so the point of training that Srila Prabhupada talks about, that before entering household life, one should be trained as a brahmachari. And so many of us may have had the opportunity to be trained in that way. Some of us may not have had the opportunity. So you can't go and change the past, but then what you can do is, what do we do from now on? So how do we then live our lives moving forward, that no matter what ashrama or varna we may be on, we can focus our attention on become Krishna conscious, and that becomes the focus of our attention at every point in time. And the last point I will make is Srila Prabhupada quotes from the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the second chapter, 7th verse. It's a very nice verse. It says, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janatya Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Yachya Hetukam. It's very, very wonderful verse. It actually says how this process of jnana and vairagya come. Jnana means knowledge, and you can combine it with vijnana as well, because vijnana means realization of that knowledge, a practical application of that knowledge. And a common word for knowledge in Sanskrit is jnana, and the common word for science, any science, is vijnana. So for instance, in chemistry in Sanskrit is called rasayana vijnana. So vijnana is literally meaning practical application of knowledge. So in this particular verse, what Sutta Goswami is saying is that by rendering devotional service to Krishna, one naturally acquires jnana and vairagya. So we don't have to go and pursue vairagya. We don't have to artificially become renounced. We don't have to artificially become detached. We have to actually proactively become Krishna conscious. And the vairagya and the jnana follow, causelessly follow. As this verse, Srila Prabhupada translates, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. So I'll leave you with this thought, that the idea is not that we have to somehow become heartless, detached individuals. We've already been given the way to attach ourselves to Krishna by chanting Krishna's holy name, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, very sincerely serving the devotees, serving the deities of the Lord, and practicing the process of Krishna consciousness that Srila Prabhupada has so wonderfully given us. So just by doing that, things like acquisition of knowledge and cultivation of detachment will happen. So our focus should be really more there, as opposed to somehow artificially trying to detach ourselves. So those are some of the points that I gathered from Srila Prabhupada's purports in my study of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And specifically, I wanted to tie the conclusions that one may get from this verse with the broader context of what Srila Prabhupada has said about Daivi Varnashrama. If I said something which was not appropriate, then you can please correct me as well. But If there are any questions or comments, we can take that now. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions at this time? Or any comments or anybody would like to add anything? Yes, Prabhu. Hare Chakra Prabhu, please.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. And our Prabhu. All glories to you, all glories to Prabhu. And all glories to the assembled devotees. During your speech, when you were talking about how we have to detach ourselves from the asana, then you went further to explain it, that the context is very important. Now, based on the explanation you gave, how do we relate that to other ashrams too, like Brahmachari, Anapras, Sannyas ashrams? Can't someone also be in that ashram and also be attached to the ashram in the sense of being that like the possessor of that ashram? Like how a grihastha can be attached to the family and be completely devoid of thinking about Krishna, which the scripture is condemning. So isn't it possible that the brahmachari can also be so attached to the ashram, the brahmachari ashram, which becomes like his or her, his main focus, uh, rather than getting absorbed in Krishna?
Yeah. 100%. Very nice question, Hare Chakra Prabhu. And so the Goswami says this in the first canto, second chapter as well. Ata Pumbi Jija Shrestha Varnashrama Vivagasha Swanishtatasya Sarmasya Tam Siddhi Haritoshanam. So the objective of following any Varnashrama system is ultimately Haritoshanam, or satisfaction of Hari. So if you forget that that is the objective, then you may be attached to the externals of anything that you're doing. Right? So each ashram has a set of responsibilities and licenses. So for instance, Grihastha, if you look at the four ashramas, Grihastha ashram is the only ashram that is allowed to make money. And practically in this day and age, you need Lakshmi to do anything. Even if you have to run a temple, you need Lakshmi. And someone has to give Lakshmi to the temple for a temple to run. Someone has to sustain the brahmachari, someone has to sustain the sannyasis to be able to give charity. In the Shastra, there is no recommendation for brahmacharis or sannyasis to give charity, because the understanding is that they don't have anything to give materially. Sannyasis and brahmacharis don't have material opulence to give. As Srila Prabhupada mentions in this purport, a brahmachari begs from door to door and then gives everything to the guru. Yeah. So everything is for the benefit of the guru. So even if the brahmachari accumulates something, or somebody gives brahmachari $1 million donation, it's not for that personal consumption of that brahmachari. So he gives everything to the guru. So in that context, we understand only grihasthas are allowed to give donation. Now, the grihastha might feel proud that, oh, I'm the maintainer of the sannyasi and the brahmachari. But that is not a true statement. That is not the right understanding. It is the mercy of those who are dedicating their lives to the pursuit of Krishna consciousness to allow a grihastha to share a portion of their wealth, to purify their consciousness, to be able to maintain their existence. Similarly, in the Srimad Bhagavatam 4th canto, in chapter 22nd, this is the meeting of the Kumaras with Prithu Maharaj. Prithu Maharaj tells the Kumaras that ultimately everything is the property of the Brahmanas, and the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas and the Shudras are simply living at the mercy of the Brahmanas. This may seem contrary, because don't the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas actually donate to the Brahmanas and the Brahmanas live at their mercy? But Puttu Maharaj explains that the Brahmanas actually own everything, but they're not interested in managing anything. They're only interested in pursuing their spiritual objectives. So they allow the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas to control everything, and they take what is needed. And remaining they leave as a donation for the Brahmanas, for the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas to enjoy. I'm giving you this context because it's a broader context of how Varnashrama works. So similarly, a brahmachari can very much feel that, well, I am in the situation where I'm more advanced than the grahastha. In fact, my spiritual master Radhanath Swami once gave a whole 4 hour lecture on because at that time, this was like almost 20 or 25 years ago, when the Chapadi ashram was still growing, there was some kind of a conflict where the brahmacharis felt they were superior, and at the same time, the grahasthas also felt they were superior, and they were maintaining the brahmacharis. And why are the brahmacharis being so arrogant or whatever else? So it was not an aggressive or overt conflict, but there was a conflict that was brewing. And to nip that in the bud, my spiritual master gave a Sunday feast class, and he talked about first he glorified the brahmacharis like anything, saying how they've renounced everything and given up. And then the brahmacharis felt really good about that. Then he started glorifying the grahasthas, saying how the grahasthas, in spite of having so many responsibilities and so on, they're making time and energy for the temple and they're maintaining the temple and so on. So in that way, he glorified both the grahasthas and the brahmacharis and showed that in the varnashrama system, it's not that one or the other. It's not one against the other. All four ashramas and the four varnas work together to enable society to become Krishna conscious. So that understanding is very critical. And if that understanding is not there, then we might think one is more important than the other, be attached to our particular service. Same thing with service also. All service is needed. Is garland making more important than cooking? Or is cooking more important than deity dressing? Or is deity dressing more important than cleaning the temple? There's no such thing. They're all equally important. Whether it's a service that's happening uh, that's visible, where you may be giving class or singing, leading the kirtan, or on the altar offering arati, that is visible service. People see that service. But 99% of the services that are critical for the deities, for Sri Radha Damodar, are not visible. There's things that people are doing that nobody sees and probably nobody even knows about. But in the minds of Sri Radha Damodar, those services are probably more important because they don't even get the recognition that others might get who are either singing or speaking or anything else. So the consciousness that all services are critical. Similarly, all the varnas and ashramas are critical for operating of a stable society is the foundation of varnashrama. And not thinking that somehow my varna is better or my ashrama is better. And similarly, being attached to a particular situation is not understanding that you're part and parcel of the Lord. And your responsibility is to just be in service of that overall mission, as opposed to focused on your specific ashrama or varna. I don't know if I answered your question, Rajak Prabhu. I kind of gave you a whole context, but if I didn't answer your question, I'm happy to discuss outside the class as well.
No, it's okay, Prabhu. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there anything else?
Yashodev Prabhu has a question in the chat.
Oh, I see that. What is your advice for raising nice Krishna conscious children? Yeah, a big topic, and I'll just maybe touch on it. There are more experienced Vaishnavas on the call as well. They can definitely add. But the simplest thing is to be a good example. I remember this phrase from Saint Francis of Assisi, and he said, "One must always be preaching, and if necessary, you may also speak." So I'll just let that sink for a second. Right? He said, "One must always be preaching, and if necessary, if needed, you may also speak." So the point is, children are very perceptive. You may say so many things, but they actually see what you do. How are you living your life? Srila Prabhupada said, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. But if they see us chanting Hare Krishna and being miserable in terms of just our consciousness and our dealings, that doesn't really inspire anybody. Just like any community, people come to a temple and people see that everybody's kind of not very enthusiastic and somehow just doing this as a chore. It doesn't enthuse the visitors to the temple. They feel they should see blissful devotees. They shouldn't see devotees who are completely fried out or spaced out. That doesn't inspire anybody. The same thing happens in the family as well. As our children grow up and they see us practicing Krishna consciousness, they don't see us as extremely happy, extremely committed, and extremely blissful in our service, then they pick up on that. They pick up on these non-verbal cues. So I'll just leave it at that. I mean, there's so many. This is a huge topic, and I'm no expert on this topic or no monopoly on this topic. But the one thing that I do firmly believe, and it's true, I've heard it from many big authorities as well, that you really have to focus on being a great example, and of course, shower them love and affection as much as you can. Doesn't mean that you do whatever they ask, but the point is they should feel the shelter. The shelter should always be felt. They should never feel that they don't have shelter, and they should feel such a great example. So as grahasthas, we have this responsibility to be great examples within our own family, for our own children. And that inspires that feeling of nurturing and feeling of love and feeling of your example works more than anything else you may tell them or force them to do. Force doesn't work anyway. You cannot force anybody to do anything. Like I mentioned earlier, right? Lord Krishna didn't force Arjun to fight the battle. He just told him, this is what you should do. Now you do what you think is right. So if Krishna didn't do that, who are we to force our children? And if you force them, then eventually it'll just backfire. So I don't know if that answers your question, Prabhu, but it's a huge topic, and yeah, I'm sure everybody has perspective, and so many senior Grahastha devotees with nice children are on the call as well, so they may have a perspective as well. Okay. Thank you. If I said something which was not appropriate, please forgive me, and you may please also correct me. We'll stop here. Thank you. Hare Krishna.